Hi everyone, I'm Father Scott Vanderveer, and I did something recently that I had not done in over a year, over 14 months, not since before the pandemic. I went to a movie in a movie theater. It was incredible. It was something that filled me with joy and gratitude. And I went to see a documentary on the children's series Sesame Street, which has been on since 1969 and was a huge part of my childhood and perhaps a big part of yours, or children or grandchildren that you have witnessed growing from seeing this educational program. I learned about the history of Sesame Street and how it was the first time that anyone ever had the idea of using the exact same techniques that television executives use to sell things in order to sell children the idea of learning, to get them as excited about the letter J or the number 7 as they were about Tootsie Rolls or some kind of game or toy that they could acquire. And there was a really remarkable part of the documentary where the creators of Sesame Street realized that they had an opportunity to teach their kids, their viewing kids, some lessons that they could learn no other way. And the greatest example of this was in 1982 when the actor who played Mr. Hooper, the store owner on Sesame Street, died. I remember Mr. Hooper's death. I was 7 years old at the time. And I did not realize until I saw this documentary just how much that handling of Mr. Hooper's death affected me. They went into depth in the documentary talking about that moment because they were going to try to skirt around the issue and write Mr. Hooper's character out of the season in a way that was clean and would cause the children maybe to just think Mr. Hooper moved to open a store in Florida or whatever else. But they decided that this was not some human-created catastrophe that kids needed to be shielded from. This was the great reckoning that comes for us all, the thing that our Christian faith deals with all the time, and the thing that everyone needs to face: death. Our own death and the death of loved ones. Because Sesame Street was always rooted in deep educational pedagogy, they found out from educational experts just exactly what children know and need to know around the time that they're 4 or 5 years old about death. And they discovered that educators and child psychologists said that the most important thing for children to know at that stage of life is that death is permanent, that the person won't be coming back, and that it's nobody's fault when someone dies, and it's okay to feel whatever feelings you are feeling. So, with that in mind, they allowed the character Big Bird, who is supposed to be in the role of every child watching. Big Bird is the companion of the children, and the adults are the ones who interact with Big Bird. Big Bird is the character who had to find out the hard way that death was permanent. He came with some pictures that he had drawn in his nest of all the different characters on Sesame Street. So he gave Bob and Gordon their pictures. He gave Maria and Susan their pictures. And then he had one of Mr. Hooper. And as he held up Mr. Hooper's picture, he said, "I can't wait to give it to him." And the adults looked at each other nervously and uncomfortably and said, "Big Bird, don't you remember that Mr. Hooper died?" And Big Bird said, "Yeah, but when he comes back, I want to show him my picture." And they had to tell him, "Big Bird, Mr. Hooper's not coming back." And Big Bird said, "Ever?" And they said, "Never. He's never coming back." The writing of this script was so beautiful. And the lessons that the children were learning were so real and challenging and painful, but remarkable. At one point, Big Bird, like any of us, spoke in the voice of a child and said, "But this makes me sad, and it's not fair, and everything was fine just a little while ago. Why did did it have to happen? Why does it have to be this way? And in a remarkable moment, Gordon got up and he came over to Big Bird and he said, Big Bird, it has to be this way just because. And Big Bird said, just because? And Gordon said, just because. I don't know what your thoughts are when you hear that, but I am struck by how brilliant it is. That's exactly right. Why must we go through these sorrows? Just because. Why are things so difficult and painful? Just because. No one's at fault. No one has done anything wrong. It's not anybody's fault. It's just because. A lesson that I am just learning now at this stage in my life as a 46-year-old priest was shared with me by Julianne Horrocks, one of the people that we interviewed for our podcast, Profiles of Endurance, that we've been doing since the beginning of COVID. And what she said is, acceptance of something doesn't mean that you like it or agree with it or even think it's for the best. Acceptance simply means you know that it's happening and you acknowledge that it's real. Another author, Scott Peck, wrote in the book The Road Less Traveled, a book that I read 25 years ago, and now I'm understanding just a little more deeply. He said mental health is a commitment to reality at all costs, even if it hurts, even if it is not what you want. Mental health is a commitment to reality at all costs. And Julianne Horrocks said, if you sit around waiting to like something that's painful in your life, you'll never accept it because you're not going to like it. It's not just that you don't understand what happened, though you may be in that position. It's that it's not something you would have chosen. You don't want it. You don't like it. Sitting around waiting to like it is not the answer. Just because is the answer. Big Bird and Gordon gave it to me when I was 7 years old, and it somehow went in there and perhaps seeded the ground so that this lesson in midlife could affect me. We don't sit around waiting to like things that happen. We acknowledge that they're happening. And when we say, but why? The answer is just because. Just because. Friends, I know that there are things going on in your life, like there are in mine, that are painful and confusing. There are things going on that cause us great suffering and sorrow. We will not know until heaven why all those things are happening. So for now, we say they are happening just because, and we place all of our trust in God. We hold on to the hope that is God's gift, and we allow our faith to make us loving and patient as we wait to understand why. It won't be on this side of heaven, but we don't need to necessarily know, as long as we're clear that we are loved by our Maker, and the things that happen just because. God bless you all.